Ryomen Sukuna is one of the main villains of the hit manga and anime Jujutsu Kaisen, but he has a history that goes back a lot further. Over 1,000 years ago, in fact, and that's what we're gonna discuss today, the stories that inspired Akutami to create one of his most iconic characters. This is Myth and Manga, a series where we dig into the myths and folklore that inspire these modern stories. So let's dig in deep, because the importance of Sukuna is not limited to a single story in Japanese mythology. Part 1. The Three Inspirations. On 2 occasions, Akutami has cited his inspiration for the character from 3 separate sources: the Nihon Shoki, a manga called The Folklore Studies of Professor Munakata, and a Japanese urban legend from the mid-2000s. Let's start with the original. Dating back to at least 720 AD, in the Nihon Shoki, or Nihongi, is the oldest mention of Ryomen Sukuna. The Nihongi is basically an ancient historical record of Japan, and Sukuna's story is limited to a very small section of it. So here it is, I promise it won't take long. In the year 377 in the Hida province, Sukuna was a really monstrous guy. He wasn't loyal to the emperor and instead spent his time ransacking everyone, really getting a kick out of it too. So the emperor sent a guy named Takefurukuma to kill him, and he did. The end. Let's start with Sukuna's appearance in the story. He's described as such: so formed that on one trunk he had 2 faces. The faces were turned away from each other, the crowns met, and there was no nape of the neck. Each had hands and feet. There were knees but no popliteal spaces or heels. As you can probably tell, Jujutsu Kaisen very loosely adapts this design. I guess he kind of has 2 faces. He has 2 sets of eyes at least. Maybe the second face is the one on his torso, but I doubt you can count a lone mouth as a whole face. Then the story goes into his weapons. Now for this, I should warn that I do need to go into manga stuff, but I will keep it very out of context and spoiler friendly. Anyway, the Nihongi continues. He was strong and nimble. He carried swords on his right and on his left side, and used bow and arrow with all 4 hands at once. Now this part shows a direct inspiration for his curse technique. His domain expansion makes use of the abilities cleave and dismantle, and is represented visually by 2 cutting instruments. This seems to be an allusion to his 2 swords. And the bow is represented in the manga through Sukuna being able to shoot an arrow made of fire. After that description, the rest of the story goes as such. On this account, he was disobedient to the imperial command and took pleasure in plundering the people. Hereupon, the emperor sent Nani Haneko Takefurukuma, ancestor of the Omi of Wani, who put him to death. The only thing I really want to talk about here is the obvious inspiration for Sukuna's personality. When we first see the character in JJK, he gives a short speech about massacring people. That's about all that's directly relevant in the original story, but I will get to how Sukuna's disobedience to the Imperial command might be relevant to him later in this video. The second piece of inspiration is another manga from the 90s called Folklore Studies of Professor Munakata. It's a series about a folklorist named Munakata and his exploration of myths and legends. Chapter 7 is all about Sukuna, with Munakata going to Hida province, where Sukuna is said to have ravaged the land. There, he discovers a grotto in which he finds the remnants of a cult that worshipped the god Agni, and concludes that the legend of Sukuna is derivative of this myth. For context, Agni is the Vedic god of fire and is identifiable by his 2 heads, just like Sukuna. This only seems to meaningfully impact Jujutsu Kaisen Sukuna by giving him command over fire in the form of his arrow attack. As far as weapons go, in this manga, the statue of Agni is depicted with a trident-like weapon. This could possibly be the inspiration for this 3-pointed spear in this color page of Prime Sukuna. And lastly, it is said that this cult committed human sacrifices, which does seem to translate to the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbook stating that Sukuna does eat people and that Urame cooks them for him. Lastly, we have the third inspiration, an urban legend from 2005. The story originates on 2chan in a thread about sharing scary stories, with the person who posted this story telling it as if it were a real event happening to them. The guy says that he's a construction worker that was demolishing an old temple. His colleague finds a sealed room with a long wooden box nailed shut. On it was white paper with old faded writing. Inside the box was a mummified corpse, but the corpse was was unusual. It had 2 heads and 4 arms. The priest is angry and identifies the corpse as Ryomen Sukuna. He also laments that they likely don't have long left to live. The story then goes into the injuries and deaths of the people involved in the incident. After that, the story goes on to give a backstory to this mummy, describing how the original person was simply born with these conditions and was involved in a ritualistic starvation and mummification. The resulting mummy named after the mythical Ryomen Sukuna because of his appearance. This process was led by a cult leader named Mononobe Tengoku, who made the mummy into a religious symbol with a thread describing it as a cursed Buddha. The story then connects itself to the many disasters in the Taisho era in Japan, such as the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923. The thread describes these events as a result of the mummy and Mononobe using it to curse Japan. So that was a lot, and it has a lot of interesting connections to Jujutsu Kaisen. The most direct ones are the aesthetic inspirations. In Chapter 1, Megumi is searching for a finger of Sukuna. That finger is found in a wooden box with a piece of paper on it, and that piece of paper has old writing inscribed on it. The idea that the corpse was causing misfortunes is very similar to the fingers attracting curses and getting people killed. It seems this story inspired the basic idea of what the Sukuna fingers are and how they function in the story, but what I find most interesting has nothing to do with any of that. What catches my attention in the story is the use of Buddhism, with this mummy being referred to as a cursed Buddha. This brings us to part 2 of the video, Sukuna and Buddhism. Buddhist symbolism is everywhere in Jujutsu Kaisen, and it is also deeply tied both to the original myth of Ryomen Sukuna and the King of Curses. In the Hida province, the same province he is said to have terrorized in the Nihongi, he is seen as the person who brought Buddhism to the area and is worshipped in several temples. And we see this kind of symbolism in Jujutsu Kaisen as well. Sukuna's domain expansion, Malevolent Shrine, is a Buddhist temple, granted a very twisted take on the concept. There's also Uraume, a character that is very loyal to Sukuna, who is also wearing Buddhist robes. This all being said, the way Akutami chooses to portray the character could not be any further from what Buddhism represents. It's not just that he kills people, but it's his attitude. Now, Buddhism does forbid the harming of others under the principle of right action, but past that, it is the pleasure he takes in murder and bloodshed that really matters. This is directly against the Buddhist ideas of dukkha and samudaya. Dukkha is basically the concept that in life we are going to experience suffering no matter what. This is caused by samudaya, the fact that we endlessly crave impermanent things, and these cravings keep us in the cycle of samsara, endlessly reincarnating. The goal of Buddhism is to escape samsara, something Sukuna clearly has no interest in. You could even interpret the fact that he can be reborn through vessels as symbolic of him being stuck in this cycle of rebirth. Much like the urban legend calls him, a cursed Buddha is a very fitting title. But Buddhism isn't all there is to this modern depiction of Sukuna. I want to discuss his possible connection to Christian iconography. Now, this is a recent thing in the manga where Sukuna has been referred to as the Disgraced One, otherwise translated as the Fallen One. A lot of people have immediately connected this to the concept of a fallen angel from the Abrahamic religions. When looking at the original title, these characters put together can very easily be interpreted as fallen from heaven. And this title is introduced to us by a character named Angel who looks like a stereotypical Judeo-Christian angel. So the idea that this is referencing Christianity is not far-fetched at all, but if that's the case, why? Well, what is a fallen angel? The idea originates from the apocryphal Book of Enoch, with the first fallen angels being the Watchers, but the most famous example of a fallen angel is Lucifer. Now, I should preface that the idea of Lucifer and him being the devil and a fallen angel is all a product of theological interpretation, but the idea is so in the cultural zeitgeist that it's most worth talking about. The story basically goes that the devil was an angel and incredibly prideful, saying, "I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." For his arrogance and intention to overcome God, he is cast out of heaven. So this all brings us to the main question: what does any of this have to do with the Sukuna of Jujutsu Jujutsu Kaisen. You see, Akutami has been really holding back when it comes to Sukuna's backstory, but when looking at the inspirations for his character, we see a much clearer picture. The first thing of note is that in the original myth about Sukuna, he is killed specifically for not being loyal to the Imperial command. The Emperor is a divine figure under the Shinto religion, which has had a varied history of conflict with Buddhism in Japan. This is comparable to the idea of a fallen angel being cast out of heaven for their sins, specifically Lucifer not wanting to be a servant of God. Both characters are basically punished for disobedience to the sovereign divinity. In the case of Jujutsu Kaisen, this would likely refer to the most powerful Jujutsu sorcerers of Sukuna's time. Whoever they weren't fans of Sukuna, based on the strong Buddhist ties to Sukuna and the fact that he seems to have a devout follower. His position likely had religious significance. In this position, he was likely offered human sacrifices and was worshipped by Ryomen, and more importantly, he was probably seen as a threat to authority. Anyway, you know the rest. Sukuna eventually died and came back as a vengeful cursed spirit, and now we're at the present. Well, all that stuff is pure speculation, but it's fun to dig into the literary and historical origins of these kinds of characters. If you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it, then be sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Have a good one and take care.